Well, tonight we are in session 10 of our review of the book of Daniel, and we are going to plunge into Daniel chapter 9. And for many, many prophecy buffs, me included, this is probably one of the most pivotal chapters in the entire Bible if you're going to understand end-time prophecy. The last 4 verses of the chapter are the fabled 70-week prophecies. We'll go through all of that. And so we are in chapter 9 of the book of Daniel. Now, just to give you context here a little bit, you realize Daniel's 12 chapters. The first 6 are historical, where he's deported, he encounters Nebuchadnezzar and interprets his dream, and his rivals, and he gets promoted as a result of that performance. His rivals get a chance to try to undo his 3 friends, the fiery furnace episode. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the world at that time, writes a chapter in the book in which he recounts his lesson in pride that God gave him. Very interesting chapter. But then, of course, the fall of Babylon. We spent 2 sessions on that because Babylon is not only important historically from a biblical perspective point of view, but it's going to be I believe, one of the major prophetic milestones that's emerging on the horizon. So we spent 2 sessions on that. Then we get to the lion's den. Now we're in the Persian Empire period. And you realize that the chapters 2 through the end of 7 are not written in Hebrew, they're Aramaic, because those chapters focus on the Gentile world. Very unusual for the Bible to do that. It usually sees everything, past and future, through the lens of Israel. But this is a section that is so dear to us because it's very unabashedly focusing on the Gentile world. Now, after the first 6 chapters, we have 6 chapters that are a collection of the visions. They're, in a sense, appended at the end, which means they're not in chronological order, the chapters all as a group. We have the times of the Gentiles, which we reviewed, and then we have the ram and the goat, that is the career of Alexander the Great as he defeats the Persians. And then we're in chapter 9, the 70 weeks, tonight. And next time will be, after we finish the chapter 9, will be get that strange glimpse of the dark side. And then we'll see the silent years between the testaments written in advance, and then we have the total wrap-up of all of history in the book of Daniel. Very exciting book. But again, it's not in chronological order. The chapters 7 and 8 occur between chapters 4 and 5. And chapter 9 occurs between chapters 5 and 6, because they're visions that were seen at that time. Looking at another way, when we got down into Nebuchadnezzar's lesson in pride, the next session would have been the times of the Gentile vision that Daniel himself received, and then the ram and the he-goat. Then Babylon falls in chapter 5, and we have this strange plot of the Magi trying to get even for Daniel being put in charge of them, this hereditary priesthood of Persia, and that leads to the lion den incident. 70 weeks would follow that. In other words, we're now in the Persian period as far as the chronology of it's concerned. And then 10, 11, and 12 follow, of course. So, again, the chapters 2 through 7 are in Aramaic, but we're now in the Hebrew again. Chapter 8 to the end is in Hebrew, meaning the focus of this is once again on Daniel and his people, in contrast to the Gentile dominion. And so 70 weeks is where we are now. Before we get into chapter 9, I think it's important for us to get another perspective, and that's when Jesus gave a confidential briefing on his second coming to his disciples. In fact, not to all of them, to 4 special ones. It's recorded in Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21. It's important enough that it's recorded in 3 Gospels. And we'll focus on Matthew's for a couple of reasons, not the least of which, Matthew had a skill the others didn't. Anyone know what it is? Shorthand. He was a customs official. It was a job requirement that he take shorthand. And that was a skill prevalent in those days. But in any case, we find that 4 disciples came to Jesus to ask about his return, the second coming. Peter, James, John, and Peter's brother Andrew. These 4 are specifically identified by Mark as being present. This happened to occur on the Mount of Olives, so some people call it the Olivet Discourse, which is sort of irrelevant because it was a private briefing to these 4 guys. But it's so important that it is recounted in 3 Gospels. Matthew 24 and 25 in the lengthy version, Mark 13 and Luke 21 are essentially parallel passages. And what's interesting is that in this briefing, Jesus specifically points them to Daniel chapter 9 as the key to end-time prophecy. And that's one of the many reasons that we're focusing on this. And we'll draw our primary perspective from Matthew 24 and 25. In Matthew 24, verse 3, it says, "As he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us,' 3 questions, 'when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?'" 3 questions in effect. And he then gives them a 2-chapter answer. To give you just a flavor of it, Jesus answered and said unto them, "Take heed that no man deceive you." Underline that word deceive, because he opens and closes this briefing to his disciples, warning them not to be deceived. So this should lead you into a special study of how do you protect yourself from being deceived. There are all kinds of people spreading all kinds of perspectives. How do you tell which one's correct? By diligence, of course, and comparing Scripture with Scripture. And your ultimate refuge is always the whole counsel of God. A perspective should be consistent with the total package. "Take heed that no man deceive you," he says, "for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. And all these are the beginning of sorrows." Many, many people view these issues as signs, except he really says these aren't signs. These are non-signs. This and that will happen, but the end is not yet. He is going to focus on some signs, some trigger points, these things are, in other words, generalities that are going to be on the horizon, and they will be increasing in frequency and intensity. The word sorrows there is actually birth pangs. You girls know what it's talking about here. They start slowly and increase in frequency, and they also increase in intensity. And that's exactly the characteristic of these things here. But the end is not yet, Jesus says. Then he gives you the key event to watch for. He's not talking to you and me. He's talking to Jewish disciples. He says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains," and he goes on. How many of you read that with me or heard those words just now? Can I see your hands? Any hands? Okay, good. I played a dirty trick on you. Do you see what instruction you got? Whoso readeth, let him understand. See, this passage will turn out to be a little technical, but it's not intended for pastors or specialists. It's intended for you and me. Whosoever readeth, let him understand. Jesus has done you a gigantic favor in these few verses, in verse 15. First of all, he saved you hours of boring library research. Who wrote the book of Daniel? Daniel. How do you know? Jesus said so. You know, the defense rests. If you believe in Jesus Christ, you know who wrote the book of Daniel. If you don't believe in Jesus Christ, you got bigger problems than the authorship of the book of Daniel, okay? He also identifies him as a prophet. But he does something even more. He points you to the very passage that's going to constitute the primary study of both tonight and the next session. And we're going to discover later, we're going to take on, what is this abomination of desolation? You see that phrase there? That's a technical phrase. We know a lot about it because it happened specifically once before in history, and we'll examine that. It's the erection of an idol. An idol is always considered an abomination in the Bible, but the ultimate abomination, the abomination that makes desolate, it's the extreme version of that, is erecting an idol, a pagan idol, in the Holy of Holies. And that happened back in 1